Mexico says it is on the offensive against a drug trafficking organization. That organization calls itself the New Generation Cartel of Jalisco.
A drug cartel shot down a Mexican military helicopter last week. This marks the first time a rocket-propelled grenade has been used by a cartel against a military aircraft.
Jalisco, 2015. A military helicopter collapses in flames, shot down by a rocket launcher of the Jalisco Cartel, New Generation. The scene is shocking. 9 dead, families devastated, and a Mexican people responding with hatred.
We heard a boom, like a bomb. They took down the aircraft. They took it down.
Behind this daring action is Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, better known as El Mencho, the most wanted drug trafficker in all of Latin America. A criminal who has taken the lives of thousands of people and has put the security of an entire society at risk.
They have the capacity to use firepower, the capacity to organize, and very probably they have infiltrated government security agencies.
El Mencho began his life in the extreme poverty of Aguililla, Michoacán, during a major economic recession. Born in 1966, he grew up in a large family where hard work was the only constant. When Nemesio was 12 years old, he had to make a very hard decision. His family was so poor that they couldn't even eat well. So one day, with no other choice, he dropped out of school and started working in the avocado fields near his home. What he didn't know was that this simple decision would change the course of his life forever. His rise has been plagued by violence and betrayal, from his beginnings as a hitman to leading an open war against the Mexican state for threatening the peace of an entire country. There is no doubt El Mencho has left a trail of blood in his wake and a society eagerly awaiting his capture. However, behind this drug lord, there is a past full of hate, deprivation, and lack of love that reveals how desperation, resentment, and greed can transform an innocent child into the most feared villain of the 21st century. Who really is the enigmatic man behind the Mencho mask, and how did he become Latin America's most feared drug trafficker? Nemesio's decision to leave school at the age of 12 marked the beginning of a path that no one could have predicted. The avocado fields where he began working were not simple plantations. It was his first exposure to the world of drug trafficking. Without knowing it, young Nemesio was putting his feet on ground controlled by the Sinaloa Cartel. This criminal group used the avocado plantations as a front for their real business, marijuana trafficking. Every day, as Nemesio toiled under the scorching sun, all around him were the pieces of a deadly game he would soon become part of. The plantation foreman, a low-ranking member of the cartel, was quick to notice the boy's dedication and cunning. Little by little, he began to assign him more complex tasks, gradually introducing him to the shadier aspects of the business. Nemesio, hungry for opportunity and eager to help his family, accepted each new challenge without question. It was on a random afternoon when the blindfold fell from his eyes. Nemesio watched as bundles of marijuana were loaded between the avocado crates. At that moment, he understood the true nature of the plantation operations. Far from being frightened, he felt a mixture of fascination and ambition. For the first time in his life, he glimpsed a way to escape the misery that had surrounded him all his life, ending the innocence of a child who wanted nothing more than to help his family. Despite the illegality, Nemesio saw in drug trafficking an opportunity to escape the poverty he had known all his life. It was clear. The wealth and power he observed in the cartel members contrasted sharply with the daily struggles of his friends and family, especially in those times. The social context of Michoacán in the 1970s and 1980s played a crucial role. The lack of economic opportunities and the growing influence of drug trafficking created a perfect breeding ground for young men like Nemesio to be attracted to the criminal world. Despite being surrounded by them, Nemesio had one quality that made him superior to the rest. He did not use drugs, a discipline that he would maintain throughout his life, and that would distinguish him from other drug trafficking leaders. This sobriety would allow him to make calculated and strategic decisions in the future that would make him a leader like no other. As Nemesio grew, his reputation as a hard worker and cunning spread. He began to gain the trust of more important members of the cartel, learning the ins and outs of the business from the ground up. This formative period in Nemesio's life laid the groundwork for his future criminal career. In the mid-1990s, at just 30 years old, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes found himself rising rapidly through the ranks of the Milenio Cartel, the same organization that had taken him in at the beginning. This colossal cartel, led by the powerful Valencia family and with hundreds of drug traffickers under its command, dominated the organized crime landscape in western Mexico. Founded in the 1970s, the Milenio Cartel had built a vast empire based on the trafficking of marijuana and cocaine, utilizing. He ingeniously used Michoacan's extensive avocado plantations as a front for his illicit operations. Nemesio, with his cunning and determination, soon gained the trust of the cartel leaders, demonstrating an innate ability for shady business dealings and a ruthless coolness in executing the most ruthless orders. By the mid-1990s, at just 30 years of age, Nemesio would soon find himself navigating the upper echelons of the same cartel that took him in, the Milenio Cartel. Led by the Valencia family, and with hundreds of drug traffickers at its disposal, this colossal cartel dominated Mexico's organized crime landscape. This organization, which had emerged in the 1970s, had built a vast empire based on marijuana and cocaine trafficking, using avocado plantations as a front for its illicit operations. As Nemesio rose through the ranks of the Milenio Cartel, he learned valuable lessons about loyalty, betrayal, and the price of power. Each step he took brought him closer to the top of the organization, but also exposed him to greater dangers. Rivals inside and outside the cartel began to see him as a threat, and the authorities began to take note of his growing influence. But Nemesio was no stranger to challenges. His childhood in poverty had toughened him, and his time in the avocado fields had taught him patience and perseverance. He used these skills to deftly navigate the cartel's dangerous corridors of power, forging strategic alliances and eliminating obstacles with cool, calculated efficiency. As the 20th century drew to a close, at just 34 years of age, Nemesio had become a key figure within the Milenio Cartel. But his ambition knew no bounds as he watched in the inner workings of the organization, he began to see not only its strengths, but also its weaknesses. In his mind, blueprints were beginning to form for what would become his own criminal empire. The new millennium would bring seismic changes to the world of Mexican drug trafficking, and Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes was perfectly positioned to take advantage of them. In the dark of a night in 1986, young Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes slipped across the US-Mexico border, leaving the avocado fields of Michoacan behind and entering a world of unimaginable opportunity and danger. Settling in Northern California, Nemesio quickly immersed himself in the turbulent underworld of drug trafficking. The San Francisco area, with its diverse population and burgeoning drug scene, became his new battleground. Here, El Mencho honed his skills, trafficking heroin and methamphetamine with an efficiency that soon caught the attention of rivals and authorities alike. During this period, Nemesio used at least 4 different aliases: Ruben Avila, Jose Lopez Peñalosa, Roberto Salgado, and Miguel Valdez. This ability to change identities allowed him to evade authorities for years, building a network of contacts and operations that extended up and down the West Coast. However, the turning point came in 1992, when the unexpected happened. Nemesio and his brother Abraham were arrested in a failed heroin-selling operation. Facing federal charges, El Mencho made a decision that would prove his cunning and loyalty. He pleaded guilty to protect his brother from a harsher sentence. This action not only saved his brother from a lengthy sentence, but also demonstrated to his associates Nemesio's unwavering loyalty, an invaluable asset in the world of organized crime. After serving 3 years in a federal prison in Texas, Nemesio was deported to Mexico in 1997. But far from being the end of his criminal career, this deportation would mark the beginning of a new and more dangerous phase in El Mencho's life. The experience in the United States had transformed Nemesio. He returned to Mexico with an in-depth knowledge of the North American drug market, a network of international contacts, and an intimate understanding of the U.S. legal system. As El Mencho crossed the border back into Mexico, no one could have imagined that this deported ex-convict would become the leader of Mexico's most feared cartel in just a few years. His time in the United States had been a school, and now he was ready to apply his lessons on a much larger scale. The question remained: how would Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes use this new knowledge and experience upon his return to the ranks of organized crime in Mexico? After his final deportation to Mexico, El Mencho wasted no time in reinserting himself into the world of drug trafficking. With the cunning and contacts he had cultivated during his time in the United States, Nemesio managed to rejoin the ranks of the powerful Sinaloa Cartel. But this time, El Mencho had a master plan to quickly move up the cartel hierarchy. In a bold and calculated move, Nemesio married Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, sister of the leaders of the Sinaloa Cartel. This marriage not only gave El Mencho a privileged position within the cartel, it also gave him a privileged position within the cartel's hierarchy, organization, but also opened the door to an unlimited network of contacts and resources. Thanks to his now wife, El Mencho was able to forge a strategic alliance with one of Mexico's most powerful and feared cartels, the Sinaloa Cartel, led by the infamous Joaquin El Chapo Guzmán. Not only that, through Ignacio Nacho Coronel, Chapo's trusted lieutenant, El Mencho managed to establish a collaboration between the Sinaloa Cartel and Coronel's faction within the Sinaloa Cartel. As part of this agreement, El Mencho became in charge of security and logistics for the Sinaloa Cartel's operations in the states of Jalisco and Colima. His experience in handling drug production and distribution, coupled with his ruthless efficiency, made him an invaluable asset to El Chapo and his organization. But as El Mencho consolidated his power and expanded his influence under the shadow of the Sinaloa Cartel, his ambition and greed continued to grow. Secretly, Nemesio began to chart his own path, to build a drug trafficking empire that would one day rival that of his former allies. By 2009, things had already gotten ugly for the Sinaloa Cartel. The police grabbed their boss, Oscar El Lobo Nava Valencia. It was a hard blow, but the worst was yet to come. 2 months later, his brother, Juan Carlos El Tigre, also went down. But the real disaster came in 2010. Ignacio Coronel, a big shot who worked with Chapo and helped the Milenio a lot, ended up dead in a shootout with the army. It was as if the last pillar had been removed from an old house. The Milenio Cartel came crashing down. It was like watching a dogfight over the remains of a meal. Everyone wanted a piece of the pie, and no one could agree. And there, in the middle of all that mess, was El Mencho. Quiet, silent, but with his eyes wide open. While everyone was killing each other, he was already planning his next move. El Mencho knew that this chaos was his big opportunity, and he wasn't going to let it pass. With the remnants of the weakened cartel and the financial backing of Los Chapitos, a powerful criminal family, Nemesio founded the Jalisco Cartel, New Generation, CJNG. After officially founding the Jalisco Cartel of the New Generation in 2009, El Mencho's goal was clear: to make the CJNG the dominant force in Jalisco and surrounding states through methamphetamine trafficking. To achieve this, he needed to eliminate his main rival, Los Zetas, a cartel known for its brutality and ruthless control of territory. In a shrewd move, El Mencho presented the CJNG as Los Matazetas, justifying their violence as a necessary fight against the greater evil represented by the Zetas. Through a well-orchestrated propaganda campaign, Nemesio positioned himself as a defender of the population, a man willing to do what was necessary to free the people from the yoke of the Zetas. And El Mencho kept his word. In a series of bloody confrontations, the CJNG demonstrated their firepower and determination to annihilate the Zetas. The streets were stained red with the blood of fallen rivals, and the message was clear. There was a new capo in town, and his name was Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes. El Mencho's strategy worked. By eliminating the Zetas, the CJNG gained sympathy among the local population. Public opinion was indifferent. The people saw Nemesio as a savior, a man who would. It mattered little that El Mencho was actually building his own empire of terror. El Mencho and the CJNG began spreading their influence throughout western and central Mexico with a combination of brute force and strategy. With an army of well-armed and trained hitmen, the cartel was quickly gaining territory, taking on any rival group that stood in its way. The CJNG used intimidation tactics against the population and corruption of local officials to establish its dominance, creating a climate of fear in the regions under its control. The cartel's expansion was not due to popular support, but to its ability to impose its will through violence and coercion, defying anyone who stood in its way. Jalisco, Colima, Guanajuato, and surrounding areas quickly fell under the absolute domination of the CJNG. El Mencho deployed his hitmen with surgical precision, eliminating the competition and consolidating his control over drug trafficking routes. The streets were filled with terror and violence, as the name Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes became synonymous with power and fear. Those who believed he was the savior were totally disappointed, for it was at that moment that they realized that Nemesio was willing to do anything to achieve his goals. Despite his exponential growth, El Mencho would not settle for being a mere pawn on the Mexican drug trafficking chessboard. His ambition and lust for power led him to openly challenge his former ally, the powerful Joaquin El Chapo Guzmán and his Sinaloa Cartel. In a short time, the once fruitful alliance became shattered, and an all-out war broke out between the two titans of the criminal world. In a bold move, El Mencho began seizing territory from the Sinaloa Cartel, challenging Chapo's dominance in his own backyard. The clashes between the two organizations became increasingly violent and bloody, leaving a trail of death and destruction in their wake. The streets of Mexico became battlefields, with shootouts and explosions rocking entire cities. El Mencho was once again demonstrating his cunning and brutality, taking advantage of every weakness of his enemies to expand his empire of terror. But El Chapo would not stand idly by. The legendary Sinaloa kingpin struck back with full force, unleashing an all-out war against the CJNG. However, El Mencho had learned the lessons of his past battles well, and his organization was prepared for conflict. The war between El Mencho and El Chapo came to a head in August 2016. In a bold move that left the drug trafficking world in shock, El Mencho ordered the kidnapping of two of Chapo's sons from a luxury restaurant in Puerto Vallarta. This bold move proved that El Mencho was no longer just a rival, but a real threat to Chapo's reign. The operation was a success, and although the sons were released days later, the message was clear. The CJNG was here to stay and feared no one, not even the legendary Chapo Guzmán. This act not only cemented El Mencho's reputation as a ruthless leader, but also marked a shift in the balance of power in Mexican drug trafficking. The Sinaloa Cartel, for the first time in decades, was on the defensive, while the CJNG energized as Mexico's new criminal powerhouse. El Mencho's rise to power not only transformed the Jalisco Cartel, New Generation, into one of Mexico's most dangerous criminal organizations, but also revolutionized the way drug cartels operate. Under his leadership, the CJNG became a disciplined and highly militarized army, with a code of conduct so strict it rivals that of the armed forces. Nemesio imposed strict rules on his hitmen: no drug use, eliminate all traces of the bodies of his victims, do not get attached to your companions, obey without question the orders of the bosses, and most importantly, never involve women or children in the cartel's affairs. Any violation of this code would be punishable by death. To ensure the effectiveness of his war machine, El Mencho actively recruits former military and police officers, taking advantage of their training and experience in combat tactics and weapons handling. These elite narco soldiers undergo rigorous training in clandestine camps, where they are prepared both physically and psychologically to execute the cartel's orders without hesitation. But El Mencho is not only concerned with brute force, he is also a master of media management and the public relations of terror. The CJNG regularly releases videos of interrogations and bloody executions of his enemies in a macabre display of power that seeks to sow fear in the population and send a clear message to his rivals. The cartel also issues communiques trying to justify their actions, presenting themselves as defenders of the people against even more ruthless cartels and corrupt authorities. This strategy has won them some support among sectors of the population who see them as a necessary evil in the face of state inefficiency. But perhaps the most disconcerting thing about El Mencho is his enigmatic and austere profile. Unlike other capos who flaunt their wealth and power, Nemesio keeps a low profile, avoiding luxuries and public appearances. He prefers to move in the shadows, spending his vast resources not on mansions and luxury cars, but on state-of-the-art weaponry and strengthening the operational capacity of his criminal army. This leadership style, a blend of military discipline, extreme brutality, and media savvy, has made El Mencho the most feared and wanted capo in Mexico. Their methods to intimidate and eliminate enemies are especially cruel, with brutal executions such as beheadings, dissolving bodies in acid, and public display of mutilated corpses, all with the aim of sowing terror and maintaining a climate of fear and submission. But the CJNG's violence is not limited to the criminal world. Nemesio has declared open war against the state, launching audacious attacks against law enforcement. One of the most shocking incidents occurred in 2015, when they shot down a military helicopter with a rocket launcher, killing 9 members of the security forces. Like a giant octopus, and through such acts of violence, the CJNG has spread its tentacles throughout the Americas, Europe, and Asia, weaving a global web of drug trafficking and illicit activities. The cartel has established strategic alliances with local mafias on every continent, leveraging its knowledge of the terrain and its contacts to facilitate drug distribution. From the jungles of South America to the bustling streets of Europe and the exotic ports of Asia, the CJNG's presence is becoming increasingly notorious. But El Mencho is not content with being just a drug kingpin. His ambition has led him to diversify the cartel's criminal activities, moving into other highly lucrative and dangerous businesses. Arms trafficking, human trafficking, extortion, and kidnapping have become an integral part of the CJNG's criminal portfolio. With this strategy of expansion and diversification, El Mencho is seeking total criminal hegemony. It is not just about dominating the drug markete, but about becoming the lord and master of the entire criminal underworld. Each new territory conquered and each new illegal activity undertaken is another step towards his ultimate goal, a criminal empire without borders or rivals. Despite multiple operations launched over the years to capture the elusive kingpin, authorities always seem to be one step behind. Each attempt to apprehend El Mencho has been unsuccessful, leaving federal and state forces empty-handed and frustrated as the CJNG leader slips through their fingers time and time again. How is it possible that such a wanted man with the entire state security apparatus behind him continues to operate with apparent impunity? The answer seems to point to a disturbing web of corruption and complicity that extends to the highest levels of government. Suspicions and accusations of links between key officials, police commanders, and the CJNG have surfaced. There is talk of official protection, of privileged information leaked to the cartel, of deliberately obstructed investigations. The most notorious case is that of Jalisco, Mencho's stronghold, where local authorities have been accused of actively collaborating with the criminal group. This institutional corruption is the perfect breeding ground for El Mencho and his organization to thrive. As long as there are officials willing to sell their loyalty to the highest bidder, as long as the justice system is riddled with holes through which criminals leak, the CJNG will continue to grow and expand its empire of violence and drug trafficking. However, despite its apparent invincibility, the cartel is not entirely immune to blows from the authorities. In an effort to weaken the CJNG's structure, security forces have managed to deal heavy blows to El Mencho's inner circle. In recent years, several of the Capo's family members and key lieutenants have been brought to justice. His wife, Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, was arrested in 2018 for organized crime. His son, Ruben Oseguera Gonzalez, alias El Menchito, was captured in 2015 and extradited to the United States. Other relatives, such as her brothers-in-law, also face judicial proceedings in both countries. However, the Jalisco Cartel, New Generation's main threat, does not appear to be the state or the armed forces. Rather, To the surprise of many, it is the health of their enigmatic leader, El Mencho. For some time now, speculation has been circulating about El Mencho's alleged kidney failure, forcing him to undergo constant dialysis treatments. It is said that the leader's health condition has worsened to the point of requiring the construction of a clandestine hospital in the mountains of Jalisco to attend to his medical needs. The cartel's silence and secrecy about its leader's condition has only fueled rumors of a possible succession on the horizon. But that is not all. In recent years, bolder theories have emerged pointing to Nemesio's supposed death. In 2022, messages attributed to a rival cartel claimed that El Mencho had died of respiratory problems while receiving treatment at a private hospital in Guadalajara. However, authorities have not. The CJNG has been able to confirm this information and, judging by the CJNG's activity, the organization appears to be operating normally under the command of its leader. But beyond the uncertainty over El Mencho's future, what is undeniable is that the CJNG has BECOME, one of Mexico's biggest security threats. Even if Nemesio were to fall, the CJNG has the capacity to adapt and continue operating under the command of his lieutenants. The cartel's vast territorial dominance, covering much of the western and central part of the country, coupled with its enormous economic power and armed capability, means it will continue to be a headache for Mexican authorities. As long as the Mexican government fails to attack at the root the conditions that allow drug trafficking, corruption, impunity, and lack of opportunity to flourish, organizations like the CJNG will continue to find fertile ground to grow and strengthen. El Mencho, dead or alive, is just a symptom of a much deeper and more complex problem that requires a comprehensive, long-term strategy to address. Until then, the CJNG will remain a menacing shadow looming over Mexico, defying the state and sowing terror in its wake.